Well, thank you. Nice to be here today. My name is Jonathan Hinze. I'm Senior Vice President International at the UX Consulting Company. If you don't know UXC, we are probably the world's #1 nuclear fuel market consultancy. We publish the global standard Uranium Price. We have introduced a uranium futures contract with NYMEX CME Group, and we're well known for our analysis of all aspects of the nuclear fuel, including uranium markets. So today I'm going to talk about the global nuclear power outlook as well as our uranium demand forecast. And let's get started. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the nuclear power industry, there are 30 countries currently operating nuclear power plants. All of those you can see here on the map in green. Many of the world's leading countries, US, China, Russia, France, Germany, etc. Japan, of course, well known for its recent Fukushima accident. And then there's quite a lot of countries around the world that are thinking about becoming nuclear power users. And at UXC, we do tracking of all the global nuclear industry events. And we count approximately 60 countries that are either serious or somewhat interested in developing nuclear power or have the potential to do so. So those are the countries you can see in this map that are shaded in pink. So that covers quite a few of the other world's leading countries, and you can see that there's quite a lot of potential for growth in this industry. So when you look at the world, there are about 432 operating reactors today with 370 gigawatts of electric power operating in 30 countries, as I said. That represents roughly 13-14% of the global electric power output around the world. So it is a significant portion, while not the majority, of course. Of those 30 operating countries, there are about 20 countries that we consider traditional nuclear power users that have been around for a long time and are either in a steady state, that means they're not going either up or down, but a few of those are in what I would term as slow decline and are destined to be using nuclear power less in the future. That includes, of course, Germany. Japan is going that direction as well in some regards, and a few others like Belgium and Switzerland. Then there's about 10 of the operating countries that are much faster in terms of their growth currently and in the future, and are planning expansions, as I said, going forward. Of the 60 or so potential newcomers, I consider about 20 of them serious, and only about 10 of them are likely to be able to actually begin a nuclear power program by 2030. Just to put that in perspective, of course, nuclear power is a very long-term endeavor. When you start a reactor, you usually operate that for 60 years. So that's it's a big project to get one up and running, but once it's going, it provides safe and steady power, baseload power for many, many decades to come. Of course, the Fukushima accident is in the minds of many, and since Fukushima, the focus on safety is paramount, and not that it wasn't before, but the accident really will awaken the world nuclear industry that there has to be even more in terms of global sharing of information, best practices, and focus on safety in terms of all technology used. One of the issues for nuclear power is the economic upfront capital cost. Once plants are operating, they can produce power at very low costs. Fuel, uranium included, is a very small, maybe a quarter of the total operating cost. But the upfront cost can be quite large. For a large 1,000 to 1,500 megawatt reactor, you're talking upwards of $6 to $8 billion in many countries. So that does make nuclear difficult for many smaller countries or smaller utilities. Still, there's a very strong logic pushing forward nuclear power. A couple of the major items to consider, of course, the global energy demand driven by economic and population growth. In addition, the focus on environmental issues, including global warming, climate change, which really does impact carbon-emitting fossil fuels. And nuclear, of course, is one that does not emit carbon, I mean. And then you've got a lot of countries that are looking at nuclear power as a way of diversifying their energy portfolio and increasing their national security So in a long-term perspective, you have to think of nuclear as part of the energy mix for many serious countries. But I would say that there are a number of headwinds uh, being created. The two most biggest ones for nuclear power are, of course, the fallout from Fukushima, as well as low natural gas prices driven by the shale gas boom of late. So when you think about the major stories in nuclear power today, there's several, of course. Some I've already touched upon, but looking at the major stories by country, right now the number one story, of course, is Japan. What's going to happen with Japan? It was the third largest user of nuclear power before Fukushima. Since then, there's been a lot of uncertainty. As of today, there's only 2 units operating out of 50 total in the country. Um, and there's a new nuclear regulation authority that's been created since the accident to be more independent, to enforce stricter safety rules. But because of that authority, the NRA as it's called, um, it's making it much more difficult for reactors to restart. And of course, that's impacting the entire country's energy situation. They're having to import a lot of LNG and coal and oil to make up the difference for nuclear power, which was representing about 30% of their electric power capacity and production before the accident. So that's one of the big issues right now, and of course that impacts global nuclear power and global nuclear fuel and uranium demand. The uncertainty around Japan. And then the longer term question in Japan is also what's the government going to do in terms of energy policy? There was an energy policy before the recent December elections in Japan that uh, talked about a phase out. That phase out policy has now been put aside with the new LDP government in Japan, but still we're not sure how long and to what extent Japan's going to be relying on nuclear. My gut tells me that there will be a long-term future for nuclear power in Japan, but it's not going to be 30% like it was before the accident. The other big story in nuclear really is also in Asia. It's China, because China represents about half of all the current reactors under construction. And although Fukushima did put a delay in terms of their construction phase, um, the government has now implemented new safety rules also in response to the Fukushima accident, and but now has allowed for new construction to restart since late last year. And there's a real strong push by the government in China to push for targeted growth through the next 2 decades. They see nuclear power in China as a critical part of the clean energy mix to reduce emissions and to diversify the overall energy portfolio. In the United States, we do have new reactors under construction, 5 total, all of them in the southeast. TVA, Southern Company, and SCANA in South Carolina are building one by TVA in Tennessee, 2 each in Georgia and South Carolina. But as I mentioned earlier, shale gas in the U.S. and low costs of natural gas is impacting all other electric power sources, including nuclear. So we don't see any other new reactors being completed before 2020 in the U.S. And there is a potential for some additional decommissioning of older, smaller units that are either uneconomic or have some safety issues that cannot comply with the post-Fukushima NRC regulations. We do already have 2 reactors that have announced permanent shutdown in the last year. One in Kewaunee in Wisconsin and Crystal River 3 in Florida. France, which relies on about 75% of nuclear for all of its electric power, is reevaluating its stance. The government has opened a nuclear debate. The President Hollande is talking about phasing out the 2 oldest reactors in the country. But there is still a strong consensus in France that nuclear power is an important part of their energy mix, and there will be continued use of it for the long term. But it's unlikely that you'll see a lot of new reactors being built in the next decade or so. Germany is, of course, the most negative story since Fukushima announced a permanent phase out. right after the accident and is now on track to shut down its last reactor at the end of 2022. This policy did exist before Fukushima, but it was never as certain as it is now. And of course, it's happening much faster than was previously expected. In the Middle East, you see the first new nuclear country in 20 years with the UAE, United Arab Emirates, starting construction last year on one of 4 reactors. And you also see positive signs in Saudi Arabia and Jordan for a new construction, but I do think that will be in the next decade, not in the near term. Southeast Asia is another region that has a lot of positive developments for new nuclear, with Vietnam and Bangladesh being the first to go, and Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia all making strong indications that they plan to add nuclear reactors in the future. So let's talk about new reactors. Right now, there's 68 reactors under construction that will be adding about 66 gigawatts of baseload power to about 14, I think, 15 countries total. And most of those, almost all those, will be done before 2020. But it's also important to know that there's many additional units around the world being planned. Some of those plans more serious than others, but we count up to over 300 units that are in various stages of planning. As mentioned, China is the world leader with 30 reactors currently under construction with 29 gigawatts of capacity. The target is to reach 58 gigawatts by 2020, which will be up from 12 gigawatts today, so a huge growth. And they also have a target of 96 gigawatts by 2025. Russia is another important growth story with 10 units under construction. There have been some delays in terms of their construction, but overall they do look like they will be adding in about 25 new units in Russia by 2030. India is also an important growth story, having just been accepted into the world nuclear markets around 2008 after an important U.S.-India bilateral agreement. There's right now 7 units under construction in India, and the target is to reach 33 gigawatts by 2030. But remember, they only have about less than 5 gigawatts today, so that would be a massive growth. South Korea also very important to this story, with 4 units currently under construction, going from 20 gigawatts today to 40 gigawatts, so doubling in capacity by 2030. I mentioned the U.S. already with 5 units under construction, and there could be more after 2020. Europe is much slower pace in terms of construction, but there are reactors under construction right now in France, Finland, and Slovakia. The UK is an important story in terms of new construction. Finland and Netherlands are also looking to add additional units. And you could see more reactors overall in the world. I list here several countries, some of them new, some of them existing, in different parts of the world that will be adding reactors. I like to call the 4 leaders in nuclear construction growth CRIS. That's short for China, Russia, India, and South Korea. Those 4 countries represent 66% of all new construction through 2030 in our forecasts. And that's an important story because most of that's in Asia. And if you look at the current leaders in nuclear power, North America and Western Europe, those 2 regions will be dropping from a current level of nearly 2/3, 63% of the world total, to down to 39% by 2030. So certainly an important story is the geopolitical shift in global nuclear power. So what does all this new construction mean for the forecast for global nuclear power? Obviously, you have some old reactors that are not going to be operating forever, so you're not going to have complete growth just because of new construction. You have some shutting down and some starting up. Before Fukushima, we had some really dramatic growth targets forecasts out to 2030, with the base case, the dotted blue line here, growing quite dramatically from the current level of around 370 gigawatts to over 700 gigawatts. That forecast has now been reduced quite a bit, as you can see, about 16% in the base case for that 2030 target. But we're still showing 61% net growth by 2030. If you look at the blue line with the orange dots, that's the current base case, with the one we think is the most probable. And I'll get into the details in a second, but this forecast shows you what the impact of Fukushima has been over the last 2 years in terms of reducing our forecasts. But I do want to highlight the fact that we're still showing quite a bit of growth and reaching 600 gigawatts by 2030. So here's the base case from our what we call a nuclear power outlook. This is our proprietary forecast. As I mentioned, we update this on a quarterly basis. The most recent I'm showing here from last quarter, end of last year. The base case here shows that there's obviously was a drop in the capacity around the world in nuclear power in 2012 after Fukushima, related to Germany and Japan. We've recovered a little bit. We'll be recovering this year, and with new reactors, especially in China and some other countries, added over the next few years, we'll be adding quite a bit of capacity out to 2020. And then the real faster growth right now is looking to be in the post-2020 period out to 2030. And if you look at the numbers, the dramatic increase is really in the Asia region, the orange region here. The other regions, North America stays flat, relatively flat. The green in Western Europe sees some downshift over the next few decades. Eastern Europe in pink is growing a little bit. In the Middle East and South America are adding just a small portion at the end. So we're going from 435 units at the end of last year, 371 gigawatts, up to 504 units, 453 gigawatts in 2020, and 607 units and 601 gigawatts in 2030. This is a base case, and this is net growth. So you're counting new builds and shutdowns. I'd note that the current number today accounts for shutdowns, permanent shutdowns in Spain, Canada, and the U.S., one each in those countries. So that's why we only have 432 units today compared to 435 units at the end of 2012. So now to talk about uranium demand. All these global nuclear forecasts obviously mean that there's going to be a need for uranium long into the future. The question is how much. This forecast shows your pre- and post-Fukushima global uranium demand forecast, which are derived from our global nuclear power forecasts, as well as our demand modeling, which is another proprietary modeling we use based on calculations used for each of the reactors under construction and operating around the world. Looking at the blue line, which we consider the most likely base case scenario, we can see that current demand around 2012 was about 185 million pounds U3O8. U3O8, of course, being the measure for uranium concentrates that's mined out of the ground. Going out into the future, you can see that demand by 2020 is going to be roughly around 200 million pounds, so significant growth. By 2030, we're looking at growth to around 275 million pounds. So adding nearly 100 million pounds a year demand from today out to 2030. So serious growth needed in terms of the amount of uranium that's produced given these forecasts. Turning to the uranium market, as the global standard uranium market price publisher, I can tell you that today the prices are relatively low compared to a few years ago. I'll show a price chart in a minute, but you can see that today we are at roughly around $442 a pound in the spot market. Long-term contract prices always go at a premium, and right now we're publishing a price of $56 a pound in the long-term market. Given the near-term fundamentals in terms of demand, we've seen a lot of contracting over the last few years, and so utilities are relatively well covered through the period of the next few years out to 2015. And given that there have been a drop in price, especially since Fukushima, utilities are less fearful about future price, and so they're not desperately signing up contracts right now. China being the fastest growth story in nuclear power and a country that is not blessed with large resources of economically mineable uranium, China is going around the world buying up a lot of uranium, both in spot and long-term contracts, as well as buying uranium mine projects. The biggest of which it's been purchased last year was the Husab project in Namibia. But it also has activities in Niger, looking at Mongolia and several other countries, Uzbekistan, and joint ventures in Kazakhstan. So you've got China still pushing price and helping to create a floor under the price. But Western utilities, especially in the U.S. and Europe, are not aggressively purchasing at the moment. Last year, we saw quite a bit of oversupply, which was driven mainly by the fact that most of Japan's reactors are offline. Japanese utilities have been taking some deliveries of uranium, but they have also been deferring or delaying, and in some cases canceling contracts where they can. We hope that with Japanese reactors returning to service that will change, but last year you can see an oversupply of roughly 7 million pounds, between what was actually needed in the market and what was produced, both in terms of mined uranium as well as what we call secondary supplies, which includes the Russian high-enriched uranium program, as well as inventories, commercial and government, reprocessed uranium, and other forms of inventories. The point to make here is that current prices are probably not necessarily viable for some new uranium projects, and so as demand grows and we need more uranium, price is likely to be growing because new mines require higher prices. It's just a factor of the marginal cost of production in most cases. Another point to make on the uranium market that we're seeing is producer consolidation, with various projects and mining companies being bought up by larger producers. I mentioned the secondary supplies. That aspect of the market remains important, but after the HEU deal goes away this year and other inventories over time will be disposed of, there will be a smaller portion of the market supplied by inventories, both government and commercial. So we do see market fundamentals improving over the coming year, especially as we expect Japanese reactors to restart. We do think by the end of the year there could be a few going, and then into 2014 a faster expansion of Japanese reactors. China's growth, of course, will continue, and there's other factors, as mentioned, on the supply side that will likely also put a stronger floor under market prices. So as mentioned, uranium price has seen some ups and downs over the last few years. We started at a price of around $15 in 2004. It even was down to $7 in the early part of the 2000s. The blue line, it represents here the spot price, and you can see that spot price reached a high of $136 a pound in June of 2007. There was a bit of a bubble produced by some speculative buying and some other activity, but since that bubble burst, price has been gradually shifting downwards, although we did see in 2011 and late 2010 a bump up in price through just about right before Fukushima. Of course, Fukushima has dramatically altered the landscape for nuclear power around the world, and since then the uranium market also has seen some drifting of sorts. But one point to make is that the $40 floor that we've seen basically exists, has not been crossed since early 2006. That $40 price has held very strongly and has held again over the last year as prices shifted downwards based on the downgraded near-term market prospects related to Japanese activity, Japanese reactors not operating. So if you see Japanese reactors coming back online, you see China still growing, you still see some other growth in other countries, and you see uranium supply continuing to be tight compared to the future demand forecasts, we do think that price will remain steadily over $40 for the foreseeable future, and as some of these other factors I've discussed um, start to come into play longer term over the next few years, we do think price should be um, going upwards, although a dramatic ramp up like we saw in the 2006-7 period is unlikely at this point. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Thank you.